So in today's web dev tip, I wanted to quickly talk to you about default exports in TypeScript, and this is something that's similar to default exports in JavaScript as well. But just to highlight what we did in the previous web dev tip, so we had a class of user and an interface of iUser, which we exported from this one file and then imported directly using their names into a separate file. So the default export is kind of like saying, in this particular file, in this module, this is the one thing that I want to export. So for example, if we were to say export default class user and then the rest of the code from that, what we will find over in the right hand side in the other file is that we're getting an error saying that we don't have a particular exported member called user. So if we just get rid of this for the moment, so where we had our import statement before, now when we're importing something from the user file, we can just say import user without the curly braces, and this will import the default export from this user file. Now, one thing with the default export is that we can actually call it anything that we want within our imported statement. So for example, here I've called it user, which matches the class name over on the left hand side, but I could call it anything else. So I could call it developer, for example, and whatever name I use within the import here, it will still reference the default export from here. So we can still do the same thing just by updating the name that we're using in the import. So that's quite a common thing if you have one particular thing that you're exporting from the file on the left hand side, in this case the user class. Of course, it's always a good idea to try and keep one thing per file. So this interface here, we might move into a separate file and export that as a default export as well. But you can still access this exported interface from here. You just need to have a comma over here after the default that we've imported. And then you can open up some curly braces, and then anything else that's exported from that file, such as the interface that we've got here in this case, can still be imported. So you might want to do something like that if you've got a couple of additional things that are really closely related to the other default exports in the user file, and you don't want to split those into separate files because it's really handy to keep them in one file. So in summary, if you've only really got one thing that you're exporting from a particular file, then you can use the default export. But if you've got multiple things that you're exporting, like lots of interfaces or lots of different properties and functions, then you might want to go with the normal export and then import those properties with the curly braces. So that's it for this tutorial. Make sure you stay tuned for more web dev tips.